Now let's move to energy. Government has been talking about the unbundling of Eskom for some time. Well, the first significant step has now been taken with the appointment of the board of the National Transmission Company of South Africa. Eskom is being split into three separate legal entities, namely generation, distribution and transmission. To discuss, we're joined by KRUGER, a civil nuclear engineer and energy expert. He's with us from his base in Paris, France. Thank you, Mr. KRUGER. Firstly, you are opposed to any unbundling of Eskom. Why?
Well, yes. Good evening to you and to the viewers. I do not believe that the government is really being frank with the facts over here. I am not opposed to unbundling in a dogmatic sense over here. I just don't believe it's a priority for South Africa at this point in time, and I believe that we are not taking in lessons from countries that had failed forms of unbundling, such as Senegal, such as Zimbabwe, such as Lebanon, such as Russia during the end of the Soviet Union, etc. What concerns me at the moment is that we are thinking unbundling is going to solve the security of supply, and I'm not convinced that the historical record on this is very clear. Eskom's focus should be to add capacity to the grid. Okay, and whether we do that through power purchase agreements with the private sector or through new generation, that's fine. But first, increase your security of supply, and then you move towards the direction of unbundling. Unbundling is an optimization process. It is to bring public sector, private sector participation, more of that into generation. But the challenge of that is that 1/3 of Eskom's fleet is under unplanned capacity loss factor. So it's basically bankrupt. And it would seem to me that the private sector, who happens to be a political party affiliates in this case, is just going to throw Eskom generation under the bus and basically dump the debt on the taxpayer.
So isn't this a good idea in that the transmission company, first you have these specialized units, and then the transmission company can buy energy from everybody. So it breaks Eskom's monopoly, which hasn't worked for South Africa, and it'll increase the pace of that capacity being offered by private players. Is that correct?
Well, that's what they claim it will do. Well, first of all, they need to look at some of the literature on the unbundling from the World Bank that said that the countries that unbundled during a crisis of this probably did not fix their security of supply. So I'm asking them, what is your reference case for this, if you say that is going to occur? Okay,
but why shouldn't it work? I mean, we know that the Eskom monopoly has not worked for South Africa. Why shouldn't it work to make a competitive market where people can offer energy to the transmission company at competitive prices?
Well, first of all, Eskom's monopoly has already been broken. People have rooftop solar, for example. There's lots of energy markets throughout the country. To being opposed to the unbundling doesn't mean you're opposed to private sector participation. What I'm highly opposed to over here is that some of the highest so-called independent private power providers, who have never been truly independent because they're subcontractors, and some of them include the president's brother-in-law, for example, are basically rent-seeking in the energy markets. And it seems to be the classical case of privatization gone wrong, which, Noam Chomsky used to say, they run it into the ground, they basically dump it on the taxpayer, and then they buy it up for scrap. And it would seem to me this is what they are intending on doing.
So you're concurring with those who say there has been a plan all along to make sure Eskom doesn't work so it can be privatized?
Well, let's look at the historical record to do that. I'm not sure if it's a plan or not. I mean, I don't have knowledge of a plan or anything of that nature. But we should note in 2016 and 17, we did not have load shedding in South Africa because there was aggressive technical management from the top that recovered Eskom's capacity. We did not have load shedding between 2009 and 2013, for example, because, again, it seems to have been some people doing maintenance at Eskom. Now, the question you should ask is why in 2018 until now we all of a sudden have load shedding? It's not due to the aging of the coal fleet, before people make that excuse, because if you look at Eskom's fleet, some of the best performing power stations are some of the oldest stations. It's because there's no will to do maintenance. It's because my view is this: South Africa, politicians and business club and everyone has made a conscious decision to walk away from the broken coal fleet because coal is dirty and bad for the environment and all these other things. They don't want to maintain it. And now basically the private sector is pitching their own ideas. Now, again, I'm not against the private sector doing that, but why can't we maintain and fix Eskom as well?
Sure. And are you suggesting that the unbundling, I mean, there's a debate about this as well, is in fact privatization?
Well, obviously. I mean, why do you do unbundling? It's to allow for private sector participation.
Yeah.
So theoretically, you can say Eskom would still not be privatized and things of that sort. But, you know, if Eskom doesn't compete, for example, and how does a company compete where 1/3 of its units are broken down? It seems to me it's a backdoor privatization. Now, again, if we accept democratically as South Africa, we want to privatize Eskom, and I acknowledge a great section of the population accepts that, let's have it open for the elections.
Yeah.
Let's present it as a political party manifesto. I believe the Democratic Alliance already runs on this anyways. Let's vote for them. But let's be honest with the voters and let's be honest with the workers, because these bankruptcies, when they will occur, will hurt those in the Mpumalanga region. Yeah. I'm not convinced the government's got any will to fix the broken coal fleet at the moment. So they must come forward and be honest about this fact.
All right. And help me to understand, are you one of those happy that transmission and distribution, those companies will still fall under Eskom? So you still have the public mandate, in a sense, to ensure that energy gets across South Africa. That is the idea. To rich and poor, it won't be the private sector deciding where the power goes.
Well, again, Eskom can still buy on what I would propose power purchase agreements. So nothing should stop them theoretically from buying from the private sector and reselling that through the current state. What I'm worried about is that they're trying to do this so-called unbundling. They're going too fast with things that will not alleviate load shedding. That's basically what I'm saying. Why can't Eskom transmission or distribution at the moment, they're already semi-unbundled because they work in compartments, just do what you just proposed? Yeah. They can. Nothing should stop them from doing it. So it's a question of policy and other political ambitions. And that's why I generally raise my voice against this.
All right. Is there any good news here? There are some energy experts on the board that has been welcomed. An energy economist, the chair, Priscilla Magalane, the vice president for Sasol's energy business. Are these people who know what they're doing?
Well, presumably they do based on their qualifications. I would assume that they act in good faith and all of these type of things. I'm just thinking that people are rushing things and that there's groupthink. And you can have groupthink among experts as well. Yeah. So, yeah, it's there's no... I don't question their motives or anything of that nature. I do, however, question, for example, some of the independent power providers that are now standing ready for this move, such as the fact that out of bid window 5, for example, something like 12 of the bids went to Patrice Motsepe, the president's brother-in-law, things of that nature. I question that type of rent-seeking in our electricity system. And I get the impression that Minister Gordhan, for example, is pushing this through because he wants to pay political favors back. I mean, that's how politics work in South Africa, right? Mm.
All right. So, well, we appreciate your time and a different view. Thank you very much. That was Hugo KRUGER, an energy expert based in Paris, France. He is a civil nuclear engineer.